this border war. Fans called it Moonshine Throwdown. I think that's the best rivalry name, an unofficial name, but the best rivalry name I've come across.
Yeah, unofficial that should become official soon enough.
Embrace it.
Green keeps it himself, looking for the end zone. Isaiah Green, touchdown! Quarterback keeper for 17, and Marshall back up by 2 touchdowns.
Story toward Jackson, got separation to the 20, to the 10, and he will go. Lucky Jackson from 54 yards out. After a Western Kentucky record 16 catches a week ago, he gives the Hilltoppers the early lead today.
Pressure off the edge. Screen delivers. What a catch for Levias, who brings it in. Armani Levias to the house. Touchdown, Marshall.
And will 46 come on the field? Yes, he will. Corey Munson, the freshman, the true freshman out of Warner Robins, Georgia. As long as 48. This will be from 52 yards. From the far hash mark, John Haggerty, the punter, will hold. Jared Nash will snap it. It's definitely long enough. It is good! Unbelievable. The true freshman, Corey Munson, hammers it home from 52 yards.
What a clutch kick there to win the ball game.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Tonight, another herd-only edition, as Stephen is working his schedule to try to join the show. But I got Trace with me right now. So we're going to talk about herd, wide receivers, and tight ends. I would say a fair amount of question marks surrounding both of these position groups. So a lot of guys to talk about, a lot of unproven talent, so to speak, a lot of, well, some known entities. And without a doubt, to me, the most versatile weapon in all of Conference USA, and in one of the most versatile in the entire country. So let's talk about it, Trace. Let's start with those wide receivers. Okay. Phil still has this unit for the herd, ranked 4th. Kind of surprising. I thought it would be more middle of the packish, but yeah, tied with Florida International for 4th. So, okay. So who departed from last year? We know that Obi Obialo missed most of the year. He came back for a handful of games and then ultimately transferred to Oklahoma, I believe it was.
Yeah.
Okay. So at least he's going to have a season for now. Who else missed or is leaving from this unit from last year?
Well, from the receivers, it's just Obi Obialo and Taven Richardson. And, I mean, of course, we know Richardson didn't play a whole lot last year. And when he did play, I mean, he didn't have a lot of stats accumulated. But, I mean, Obialo, obviously, that's, I mean, not to lead into this part too early, but that's obviously the toughest loss. It's Obi Obialo. I mean, it's really the only legit receiver that they are losing. No disrespect to Richardson, but he just didn't have a whole lot last year to stat wise. So I mean, look at losing Obialo. I mean, if you just look at it, I mean, he missed the first 9 games last year, and then the first game that he played against Louisiana Tech, he had 100+ yards receiving, which is the only time all of last year that a Marshall receiver had 100 yards in a game. I mean, I think that says it all, really. I mean, he was the only true consistent receiver that they had, and he played in 4 games. Like, that's pretty telling as to how last season went. So those are the only 2 losses. But I mean, obviously, Obialo is a big loss. So,
yeah, Richardson came in for a transfer from University of Kentucky, had a lot of SEC experience. A lot of Herd fans kind of thought, okay, cool, he's going to come into Conference USA, and not that he's going to have his way, but we figured, all right, we might see some fair amount of production here. You know, maybe a good 35, 40 catches for a few hundred yards. You can't find the end zone a few times. Just solid contributor. And I don't know what he ended up having on the year, but it just seems like 8 catches on the year. Okay, so that's definitely not what we thought we were going to be seeing with Richardson in a Herd uniform. So, yeah, you're right. Obialo's the biggest loss, which, of course, we'll answer that question later on. But the man only played in 4 games. So, basically, the wide receiver core is intact. And it was young last year. Some key moments in some big games kind of prove that. There were some big drops in really inopportune times. A lot of points stayed off of the board. And Isaiah Green got a lot of the flack for that, but sometimes wide receivers just drop touchdown passes, and we talked about it several times. I remember one game in particular, it was like 3 or 4 touchdown passes got dropped. I can't remember which game it was, but I don't know. The quarterback gets the accolades and he gets the blame most of the time. And, that again, we're going to keep bringing that up because that's going to be a theme with this Marshall team. Obviously, you got a new quarterback at the helm. How is that going to work with the wide receivers? Who's going to gel the best, create the best chemistry with that group of wideouts and tight ends? So let's talk about these starters as the resident expert Phil Steele sees it. Wide receiver Brock Thompson, the sophomore, 6'2", 176. Willie Johnson, the senior, feels like he's been here forever. Yeah. 6 foot, 180 pounder. Willie has got to be one of the fastest guys in the entire conference. I love the way they started moving him around last year, and the end arounds and things really caught some teams off guard and went for big plays. Yeah. Slot receiver transfer from Nebraska, Jaron Woodyard. He's the senior, 5'11", 185. That's your 3 listed receivers. So let's talk about those guys. Pick with who you want to start with, and we'll run down those 3, and then we'll talk about a few other guys, of course.
Yeah, as just a projected starting 3, that's a pretty intriguing 3, I think. If you look at Brock Thompson, he showed a lot of signs last year of being, potentially a really good player in the future. Just like all the other young receivers, he was very inconsistent. We saw that play out week in, week out. But, he made plays last year that were just spectacular. That one catch he had against Western Kentucky in the first quarter, I think it was a big-time play. Like a mid-air adjustment, great, long, huge pass that got him inside the 5, and then Isaiah Green ran it in from there. But, Brock Thompson showed some really good signs, and I think he could have a really good year potentially this year if he just starts playing more consistent. He's got to limit drops because he dropped a few last year. And then Willie Johnson, I think he probably had his best year as a receiver last year. You look at the numbers, they don't necessarily scream at you, but his yards per catch kind of screams at you. It was like, I'm trying to look on here, in the Phil Steele, and it says that he averaged 26.8 yards per catch last year. What?
That's pretty okay.
That's pretty okay. And it wasn't just that. I remember seeing something that said that even every time he touched the ball, including runs and receptions, he averaged over 20 yards a touch last year. The guy's a playmaker. They need to give him the ball more, and I expect them to do so. And then looking at Jaron Woodyard, he has limited stats at Nebraska, obviously. But, there was a guy not too long ago that Marshall had that had limited stats at his previous school, and he ended up being Tyree Brady. So, true. It doesn't always – just because you have limited stats doesn't always mean you're just a bum. It might just not have fit in the right situation. Now, I'm not saying Woodyard's going to be Tyree Brady, but I'm just drawing the comparisons that he could still have an impactful year, even though he has limited stats at his previous destination. So I think those 3 are pretty intriguing. And then there's a few other guys as well. Artie Henry's back. I'm excited to see him back. He missed all last year. He started coming on strong at the end of 2018. I like that. I like Corey Gamage, very inconsistent playing time last year, but I think he's got a really strong upside. So there's some weapons there, but, to wrap it all up into one little bit here, they have to play better than they did last year. They just have to.
Well, you expect that will happen, but, anytime you have really just one senior, a grad transfer is a senior, but he's not been with this program. Willie Johnson, he's the senior. So everybody else, it's like sophomore, here's junior, redshirt freshman, sophomore. It's a very young group. And I hate to, when people hide behind that, well, we're young, yeah. Every football team's young every year, it just is what it is. But this group of receivers is young. I mean, one senior now, and a grad transfer senior that has not been in Huntington very long. So let's hope that the dropsies and the inconsistencies are gone from last year. But you mentioned a few guys. One of those guys you mentioned earlier, Talik Keaton, 6'1", 180-pound sophomore, doubles as Marshall's punt returner, or at least he did last year. So he's got that game-breaking ability. But we'll see if he takes the next stride to be a wide receiver and a viable weapon in the offense instead of just a special teams threat. One guy that I would think most Herd fans are really intrigued by is the aforementioned Corey Gamage. I mean, you just can't teach 6'4", 203 pounds. I think he was originally committed to the Florida Gators or something like that, and then still ended up coming to Marshall. But we saw a glimpse of the talent that he has, and it was up again, down again last year. And I don't really know what the situation was of why his playing time kind of went away, but let's hope all that goes away and we can see him on the field a little bit more, because he's just an absolute game-breaking talent. So. But I would like to think that the one guy that I would like to see step it up a little bit is Brock Thompson, because we saw multiple times that he has the ability to be a real game changer. He can bust a game wide open. And if there's a capable quarterback on the roster that can get the ball to these guys, that can make semi-decent throws, I think Marshall's wideouts have the athleticism to go get an unperfectly thrown ball. So, if they got a 50-50 ball, I think you like their chances at coming down with it more often than not. But it all goes back to, does more than one guy take the step? Who's going to emerge as the downfield threat? Because you can't just do the 5-yard and try to get 40 after the 5-yard pass all game or all season long. It's just is not going to work. So that's the big question mark. We talked about it earlier. Who's the biggest loss? And I think we both agree that it's Obi Obialo. I'd like to piggyback off what you said earlier about Tyree Brady. Obialo is another guy that transferred in from Marshall with virtually no stats from where he came from, he was a walk-on at Oklahoma State.
Yep.
And came to Marshall and became a really big part of their offense for a number of years. And had Tyree Brady not been on the roster at the exact same time, I don't think it's by any stretch of the imagination to figure that Obialo could have been the number one receiver for multiple years. So
yeah,
I think without a doubt, you and I are in agreement, he's the biggest loss. So who are you most excited to see in 2020 from this group?
Yeah, there's a few interesting possibilities there, but I wrote down Willie Johnson, and I really am excited to see him this year because, quite frankly, I think he's going to have his best year so far as a receiver. And it's kind of part of my hot take, which I'll lead in more later. But I really expect good things from Willie Johnson this year. I mean, he's starting to show. I mean, he pretty much already knew it from his freshman year on, but he's really starting to show that he can be a major player, game breaker. I mean, like you said, like all those reverses that they ran with him last year and all those different stuff that they spread him around, and he started making more plays through as a receiver. I mean, that FAU game, just thinking that fourth quarter, that huge long touchdown, he blew right past the whole D, scored about a 60-yard touchdown. That was a big, big play in that win. So, yeah. I mean, Willie Johnson, I expect him to have a real good season, honestly, and I expect him to have the season that they really need to have for a receiver because last year there's nobody – I was looking at the stats on here, and it was pretty shocking, actually, to see that as for all the receivers, their leading receiver only had, just pure receivers go, their leading receiver only had 19 catches last year. I think that's what it was, 19. I mean, wow. That's not going to cut it. It just is not going to cut it. I mean, it just – I don't know. That's where I'm
not unless you got 10 guys with 19 receptions.
Right.
I mean, 19 is not going to cut it.
No.
So look, I stepped over a guy, and I want to go back and I want to talk about him real quick because I think it's a really big point to make. Again, you mentioned it really quickly, and that's the return of Artie Henry. I can't believe I forgot about that. I think had he been healthy alongside Willie Johnson last year, that would have really provided a lot more flexibility and probably creativity to the offense for Tim Cramsey because you got two guys that can flat burn it that are basically mirror images of one another. I mean, Willie Johnson is 6 foot 180, Artie Henry 6'1", 181, and a senior. So not having him in the lineup is just one less game-breaking weapon that you got. So imagine a scenario where you've got Willie Johnson on the field, Artie Henry on the field, Xavier Gaines, who we'll talk about later on the field, maybe Corey Gamage on the outside, and perhaps Brock Thompson as well. You go 5 wide with those kind of weapons. Oh, and by the way, you've got Brendan Knox in the backfield. So that is an obscene amount of speed and talent. And it makes you wonder what type of stuff is in the notebook for Tim Cramsey to be pulling out and calling. So just had to talk about Artie Henry there because, not having him last year was a big detriment to that Herd offense. So who's your MVP for this position group in 2020, Trace?
Yeah, I really had to think about this one hard because I feel like any of these guys, for the most part, could fit this role just because there's so much kind of unknown with the receivers. We don't know if they're going to step up or not. But I went with Brock Thompson just because I feel like from top to bottom, he has the most potential out of all these receivers. That's just kind of what I feel with him. Like I said, like we both said, he's shown flashes of it. He has the potential to be a really good receiver for him, and he needs to become that. I mean, he's going to be a sophomore now. He needs to take a big step. I mean, he had, I think, 19 catches last year. I think he was the leading receiver from just solely wide receivers. I'd like to see him double that at least. I mean, I think that's a safe assumption to think he could at least double that. Hopefully more. I don't know. But, I mean, I think they're going to really need him to step up. And, I mean, and for the love of God, he's wearing number 88, and he's playing on Marshall. That man's got to do something big. So that's my MVP, Brock Thompson.
That is – I mean, that's just one of those things, like I get that, wide receivers, really all football players, all athletes across every sport need to be confident in their ability. But putting on 88 at Marshall just means like you got to be something like for real, something, because every butt in the stands is going to be like, you are wearing Randy Moss's number, dude. Like, it's not just a handful of people are thinking that. Like, everybody in the stadium is thinking that. So I hope you come correct with it this year, Brock, and put up some of those Moss type numbers. I think I'm most excited to see two guys. Thompson is one of those guys, and the return of Artie Henry is the other one. I'd like to see how he fits into the Tim Cramsey offense and jives with Willie Johnson and the rest of those guys. I'm just intrigued to see what kind of plays they draw up for him. So those two guys for sure. All right, so who's going to be your breakout player in 2020 for this group, Trace?
Yeah, I went with Jaron Woodyard just because he's a new guy coming in. It's a different kind of circumstances here. I mean, as a grad transfer from Nebraska, I mean, that's intriguing just to roll it off the tongue. Like, that just sounds like it could be something potentially good. I mean, we just don't really know what we're going to get with him. But, I mean, Phil still has him listed here as a slot guy. So, like, I could see him having a good year at the slot position. I mean, quite frankly, they haven't had a whole lot of production from the slot in a while. I mean, when was the last group? Like Tommy Schuler, probably?
Tommy Schuler, yeah.
I mean, and so that's been 2014 was since he's been gone. So, I mean, it's been a while since they've had a really solid slot receiver, I feel like, or at least one that they can depend on week in and week out. So, hopefully Woodyard can be that. I don't really know anything about him, to be honest with you. I have never watched him. But, I mean, it sounds like I think there's a lot of guys that could be the breakout player just because they were young last year and they kind of were up and down some more. But, like, I feel like I'm just going to go with this guy just because I'm more intrigued than anything to see him. So I'm going to go Jaron Woodyard.
I'm going Corey Gamage on this one because I saw glimpses of what he can do. I saw glimpses of the athletic plays he can make. I saw glimpses of the way he can control a defender. And now I want to see it across the course of a whole season. And if that's something that we get to see, I think you may see a 1,000-yard receiver, come basically out of nowhere because of the limited playing time last year. But, man, I think it's all there. I think he's going to be the breakout player for the Herd. So let's talk about a hot take, Trace. What do you got for this? Are we going for another, 10-pronged hot take thing that we have to check the list off to get it all?
No, this one's going to be a little more basic. It's just going to be a stat line prediction more so than anything. But my reoccurring theme of the wide receivers has been Willie Johnson, and this is going to be a prediction of what I think he can do this season. So now this might not. I mean, this really doesn't sound like it's that hot. But if you just think about his stats as a receiver over the last 3 or 4 years, you'll figure this is pretty hot take just because he has not put up numbers like this yet. But I'm going to say Willie Johnson will end up with 50+ catches for 600+ yards and 10 touchdowns through the air. That's what I'm going with. 10 touchdowns through the air. Not to mention probably another maybe 5 on the as a receiver, or not as a receiver, but as a running option. Yeah. So I feel like he could really have a really good year for Marshall this year, and that's what needs to happen. He's a senior. Seniors need to step up when their numbers called, and his numbers are going to be called this year. I mean, I think he's going to be a really good player for him this year. He's been really good for him over the years. It's just now we got to see him get the ball more, get more targets through the air. I want to see it. I want to see it unleashed. So I'm going to go Willie Johnson for that. My stat line prediction on hot take.
I'm kind of going with a mild medium take. You said the leading receiver last year had 19 receptions. I think the leading receiver this year will have 50+ balls, but I think Marshall will have at least 3 receivers with 30+ catches. So, considering that there's a new quarterback and we don't really know who that is yet, and all that kind of stuff, and how many carries are they going to not give in the gut of Brendan Knox just to throw a ball? So, that's my medium well take. It's not very hot. It's medium well. All right, so let's transition into some tight ends. Another unit that is, saw its fair amount of turnover this year. So let's talk about it. I mean, of course, the main man on everybody's radar is Xavier Gaines, and rightfully so, without a doubt, one of the most versatile weapons, if not the most versatile weapon in Conference USA, and one of the most versatile weapons in the nation. I mean, he lined up at God knows how many positions last year. He lined up at quarterback and slot receiver and out wide and running back and tight end, and I mean, pretty much everywhere but offensive line. So
pretty much.
Maybe that's the encore this year. He's going to play offensive line a little bit. Who knows? So let's talk about these tight ends. We got a couple that are returning this year, at least with some significant playing time. Of course, the big loss is Armani Levias, because for the most of the season, Marshall was unique in the fact that their 2 leading receivers were tight ends. And it was mentioned numerous times during game broadcasts that Marshall utilizes their tight ends differently than anybody in the nation, and they were the 2 leading receivers on the team. So let's talk about these tight ends. Who are you excited to see? Who do you think will emerge? All of that good stuff. So you can begin where you want to begin. If you want to talk about what Levias was able to do and what shoes those are to fill, or if you want to talk about some young guys, let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, it goes without saying that the tight end position is a very, very crucial position for Marshall's offense. I think it's been that for as long as I've been a fan, to tell you the truth. A long time. Long time. I mean, they've been very dependent on tight ends over the years, and they produce some outstanding tight ends. I mean, every decade, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, I mean, 80s, whatever, they've had tight ends real good. And I think that they have one right now that is as good as maybe any of them as far as just a pure athlete goes. It's hard to call him even a tight end because he's just a football player. Like, he's just a football player. He's just an athlete that you can put him anywhere on the field, essentially offensively, and he's going to make plays. But I mean, it goes without saying that losing Armani Levias is going to be a tough loss because I mean he was second team all conference last year, leading receptionist. Led the team in receiving yards as a tight end. So, I mean, it's going to be tough to replace that. But, I feel like if there's anybody that's capable of doing so, it is Xavier Gaines. He's an extremely talented player, as we know. I mean, one of the most versatile players probably in college football, and I think he might be maybe the best pure athlete in Conference USA if you think about it. I mean, he's got that kind of ability, I feel like. So, like, I think he's going to be really good to picking up that slack. I think Devin Miller's going to have another good year. He started showing signs last year. He had a touchdown in that Ohio game, I remember. So, like, they could be – I mean, the tight end position's in pretty good shape. It's just the only questions I would have would be after those top two guys, who's going to step up. That's really the only question I would have because a lot of those guys back there, virtually all of them are unproven. So, like, but if you just look at the top two, though, they're pretty doggone good shape, if you ask me. But, I mean, even with losing Armani Levias. But, I mean, it's going to be tough to replace that. But, like, I think they have a pretty good foundation there at tight end.
Yeah, after Gaines and Devin Miller, there's really nobody on the roster listed as a tight end that has any significant playing time. I mean, listed at tight end number 3 is former starting quarterback Garrett Morrell. So he's a senior. I don't know how much playing time he'll see as a tight end or if any, to be honest with you, but he's 6'3", 250. I mean, that's a good build right there. If anything, you'd think the man can throw some blocks on the goal line or something like that. Then you got a couple of redshirt freshmen listed. Xavier Cunningham, 6'4", 242 pounds. And then Amir Richardson, he's a West Virginia kid, 6'2", 211 pounds. And I know in the most current recruiting class, they picked up a couple of tight ends as well. I think at least one junior college guy. What was his name? Logan something. Clark, I want to say. Logan Clark, maybe. But he came highly touted out of the JUCO ranks. And then there's a sixth one. Jeez, I can't believe Phil still doesn't have him on here. He's really not doing me any favors right now. And I did a terrible job of making notes, so my apologies. But, you know, you got to like what you got in Gaines. You got to like what you have, at least based on what you saw last year from Devin Miller. Another one of those that you want to throw in with the wide receivers and say, all right, let's clean it up a little bit. Let's make sure we're a little bit more short-handed. And if so, Marshall's got a formidable 1-2 punch at tight end. So I guess it goes without saying once again that Armani Levias would be the biggest loss from the tight end group since he's basically the only loss from the tight end group. But, hey, he was the leading receiver on the team, so it doesn't matter if he was the only tight end or not. It's a big loss. So who's your breakout player? We're going to mix it up a little bit. We know Gaines, come on. Who's the breakout player for the tight ends this year?
Yeah, I don't think it can be Gaines personally.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he broke out last year.
I'm pretty sure, yeah, he's doing plenty breaking out. But I'm going to go Devin Miller. I mean, I feel like he's going to have a good year this year. I mean, if you look at his numbers last year, they don't blow you away. But, like, he was productive, and he was in there quite a bit. Like, I mean, they ran a lot of 3 tight end, maybe even 4 tight end sets. They ran a lot of those last year, and he was in there on pretty much all of them. So, like, he's played a lot. I think he's a solid, blocking tight end at the time, right now. And I'd like to see him get a little better in the receiving game, and I think he will. I mean, he did have that one touchdown against Ohio, which is still a pretty funny play to think back at it. Just that whole play was pretty wild. But, I mean, I think Miller, I think he's going to have a pretty good breakout year. I mean, I'm not going to go real crazy and say he's going to be like a all-conference player or anything, but, like, he's going to be a guy that if you forget about, he'll come up and burn you. That's what I feel like he's going to have that kind of role this year. So I'm going to go breakout as Devin Miller.
Well, here's the thing. I'm going to agree with you as far as Devin Miller as the breakout player, and here's my main reason why. He's going to be lined up mostly opposite Xavier Gaines, and that dude is going to draw all the freaking attention.
Yeah.
I mean, so that opens up extra opportunity for a mismatch for Devin Miller more often than not. And if the Herd is able to take advantage of those mismatches, which is basically what football's all about, is mismatches. If you can win those mismatches, then this dude can come up out of nowhere and have a really surprising season. Like, wow, I didn't know those kind of stats were going to occur, but like I said, you got the most versatile weapon in Conference USA on the same offense, then Miller's going to have the opportunity to make some plays. And if he can make the plays, he's going to have some inflated stats. So who do you think will be the 2020 MVP from the tight end group?
Xavier Gaines.
Scheduled tweet. Yeah.
That's what I'm rolling with there. he might not only be the tight end MVP, he might be the whole team MVP. To tell you the truth, I think he's one of the 2 or 3 leading candidates for the entire team MVP. So naturally he'd be the tight end MVP. I mean, it's just that's a tough guy to match up against, especially where he's lined up as a tight end, and we know what tight ends usually are. They're kind of like safety blankets, just guys you can trust and throw dump downs to and whatnot. He ain't getting no dump downs. He's not looking for dump downs. He's looking to stretch the field vertically, which a lot of tight ends don't have the ability to do just because they don't have the athletic speed. He's got that. I mean, he's a mismatch. He's really I don't even know, a receiver masquerading as a tight end. I mean, he's that good. And honestly, I mean, he can play about any position on the offense, but I think that he's found a pretty good niche at tight end, and I just think he's a tough guy to guard. And I mean, I think that's going to be even more evident this year. So,
yeah, we saw a special package of plays where he was lined up at all kinds of different positions, including quarterback. I expect to see much more of that in the 2020 season. And at 6'3", 221 pounds, he's got the size to use his body to shield a defensive back. He's got the size to go shrug off a chip block from a linebacker or something like that. And he's got the speed to run away from a linebacker. So he is the truest definition of a mismatch. And not to mention, you throw in the fact that, yeah, they are safety blankets or something like that from time to time. And we keep going to go back to the fact that there will be a new quarterback and they'll be looking for those tight ends. And who else to be looking for the most than the guy who really can't be covered by anyone? I mean, not all game long. Play to play, somebody might be able to cover him, but he's going to bite you. Every game, Gaines is going to get you somehow with some big play, whether it's through the air or if he's running, if he's making the throw, who knows? But he's going to get you. So let's see. We talked about what we talked about. We talked about breakout player. We talked about MVP. Who are you most excited to see in 2020?
Scheduled tweet. I'm not even getting into it.
Yeah. No offense, guys. It's Xavier Gaines.
That's all I got. That's all I got right there.
Yeah, we just talked about every single thing that you could want to hope to see out of Gaines, so why repeat ourselves? How about a hot take for the 2020 tight end group?
Yeah, this one, I'm pretty proud of myself on this one. I feel like this is going to be pretty – I think it's attainable. I think it's a very attainable hot take, very attainable goal. But I wrote down Gaines is going to lead Conference USA in tight ends – or let me start that over. Gaines is going to lead Conference USA in touchdowns for a tight end. That's my hot take. For all tight ends in Conference USA, he will have the most overall touchdowns, whether it's through the air, whether it's on the ground, whether it's throwing, for that matter. He's going to lead all tight ends in Conference USA in touchdowns. I think that's honestly that's probably a safe bet. Honestly, that could end up being a safe bet just because of the season that we expect him to have. But I think that's more than he's more than capable of getting that done. So I don't know what number I would think. I mean, maybe, I don't know, 20 plus. Could we see 20 plus touchdowns from him this year? We might.
I don't know. That'd be a lot. But I mean, you're talking about touchdowns accounted for. So What do you think? Maybe you get 2 or 3 on the ground, maybe 5. Maybe you throw 1 or 2, maybe 3. So at best case, you're looking at 8. So you're telling me he's going to get 12 through the air or more? That's pretty tough when you break it down that way. But is it impossible? Nah, it's not impossible. It's just that would be one hell of a season, without a doubt. One hell of a season. I don't know if I can top that, but I would like to say that Xavier Gaines will probably be 1,000 all-purpose yards, running. I mean, I don't want to even count throwing, but running and receiving, I would like to think he would account for 1,000 all-purpose yards. So that's my mediocre take again for the tight ends, but whatevs. So let's talk about some final thoughts here. We'll ease out on this wide receiver tight end episode and look forward to being a week closer to a potential season. So what you got?
Yeah, last year it goes without saying that the receiving unit was very, quite frankly, underwhelming. I mean, that's kind of in a broad look, and looking at it broadly, they were underwhelming. I mean, when your top receiver only has 19 catches, that's just not going to get it done. It just isn't. Now, it's not all the receivers. Isaiah Green had a lot of issues with that last year. They play hand in hand. Both factors, Green and the receivers, benefited to any issues that they had last year offensively. It's not just one side, but the receivers this year, man, they have to step it up. I mean, they're a year older. They're a year more experienced. They have more time under the belt. They have to make more plays. That's just the point-blank fact of how it has to be. You can't have another season like they had last year where you only had – I don't even remember what it was. It was like less than 90 catches for the entire receiving unit last year. Like, I mean, you can't have that. Like, how many great Marshall receivers have had 90 catches in one season by themselves?
Yeah.
I mean, you just can't have 6 or 7 guys combining for 85 or 90 catches. That's just not going to do it. Especially now with probably an inexperienced quarterback in there, they're going to have to bail the quarterback out a few times. I mean, probably more so now than they have had to do in the past. So, receivers got to step up. Tight ends, I mean, I'm pretty confident in those guys, even with losing Armani Levias. I mean, Xavier Gaines by himself makes it a confident unit. But then you add Devin Miller in there, he'll make more plays this year. And then maybe if anybody else gets in there in the mix, who knows? But, I mean, receivers and tight ends, I was kind of surprised when you said that Phil Steele had him 4th. Well, that kind of surprised me. Just because last year he had him 7th preseason, and like this year they lose Obialo, who he had on the roster last year. So like I don't know, I was kind of surprised that they had him up there at 4th, but possible, I guess. It's more of a thing where they have to show me. I have to see it to believe it. So we'll see, and I hope they can do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got to think that the charge for that 4th ranking is led by the versatility and lethality of Xavier Gaines and the fact that Willie Johnson was good for 26 yards a catch
Yeah.
and basically 20 yards a touch. So you got both those guys returning. But look, it is what it is. You were right. Wide receiver, the passing game, tight ends, whatever, goes hand in hand with the quarterback. The quarterback play was lackluster last year. It was very average, and I don't think that that's being too harsh at all. There were plenty of balls that were dropped, but there were also plenty of balls that were uncatchable. Yeah. And that's just 2 areas that, well, they just have to flat get better. I mean, you can't go around dropping balls and sailing passes and think everything's going to be okay.
Remember that Cincinnati game? First offensive play of the game would have been about a 90-yard touchdown. He overthrew the guy.
Yeah. And, I mean, it happens, you know, and you think about the loss at Charlotte. You've said it before. How many times, how many completions for the whole game? You talk about the game at Boise State. How many completions for the whole game? You know, I mean, how many times did Isaiah Green have less than 100 yards passing in a game? And that's you can't do that and expect to win. And the only reason you're in the game at that point is because you've got a stud at running back who's making plays when everybody is ganging up and knowing he's getting the ball, because you're unable to pass that week or whatever. So you like to think that those things are going to get better, even marginally better is better. So I like kind of where Marshall's at with the wide receivers. I really like where they're at as far as Xavier Gaines, and I like to think that Devin Miller is going to take the leap forward. A couple of JUCO guys coming in, or at least one, should help solidify that unit. So Marshall's been really, really good for a really, really long time at tight end. They put a lot of guys in the NFL. I mean, not a lot of guys have sustained long careers, but they've put a lot of guys in the NFL. They've got a really, really good lineage of tight end, and it's really not something you think about. Yeah. The average fan probably doesn't think about that at Marshall, but if you go back and think, man, they've just had a really good string of tight ends for as long as you care to look. So you like where they're at. Let's just see if they can take the step further. So until next week, let's get the heck out of here and take us out.
Go Herds.
Follow the guidelines.
Follow the guidelines.
It's the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Later.